Hello everybody, once again most welcome to Tutorials Point. Well, everything comes with its own benefits and challenges, so does leadership. Well, what is the most or the biggest challenge of a leader? Well, it is, as you read it correct, solving team conflicts. Well, obviously because you're a leader, so everyone looks up to you to basically resolve any conflict which happens in your team. And believe you me, because you are the leader, you have to go through the heat of the conflict. So how do you actually use your leadership skills to basically solve any conflict in the most fruitful and productive way? Let's go ahead and see. Okay, now first and the foremost thing to resolve any conflict, be it as a leader at your workplace or be it in your personal life, is to acknowledge the conflict. Well, this is just like unless and until you acknowledge the fact that you are not doing well, would you think about going to the doctor? Or would your disease or ailment be even cured? Well, definitely not. So similarly it goes for a conflict in a team as well. So first thing is, you need to acknowledge the conflict. It should definitely not be pushed under the carpet to basically show that you're a picture perfect team or something like that, to probably maintain your reputation as a leader who is leading that team. Well, if that continues to happen, believe you me, your entire team is one day probably going to end into a civil war, and you do not want that to happen as a leader, isn't it? Which is why the first thing that you need to take care of is to acknowledge the conflict, right? Only then would each one of you start looking forward to a solution, right? Okay. Then the second thing comes, which basically comes in line, is to discuss the impact. Now, once you have acknowledged with your team members that yes, there is a conflict in your team, definitely along with that conflict, also discuss the impact of it, right? So as you discuss the impact of it, all both the parties which are basically involved in that conflict will maybe would be to their first step of realizing that their deeds or whatever they are doing is basically rendering a huge impact to the entire team, right? So only then would that thought of resolving that conflict even cross the minds of the people who are basically involved in the conflict, right? So you are not the only one who should be thinking about solving the conflict. It should be their realization as well, right? So once you discuss the impact, it is then that realization is going to crop up in their mind that okay, because of our conflict, this is the bigger impact or bigger picture, right, which is going to happen because of our conflict. So how should we proceed forward with it, right? So it is only then that they would also get into a solution mode rather than just remaining in that particular conflict mode, right? So discussing the impact is going to be your next step. Okay, now that you have acknowledged the conflict and you also have discussed the impact, now how do you go forward in solving that conflict? Well, agree to communicate and listen actively. Now, this is right, you definitely for granted are basically you are looked up to listen and solve the conflict, right? Everyone would somewhere in their back of their mind believe that okay, even if there is a conflict, we have a leader sitting at the top and it is his responsibility, his or her responsibility to basically solve this conflict, right? So, and of course, because they do believe and because you are the one who is probably expected to do that thing of solving the team conflict, so you have to agree to communicate and listen effectively because you are there to solve the conflict, right? So without communicating and listening effectively, no conflict in this world can even be solved, right? So same goes for a conflict in your team as well as a leader. So now next step is that you will agree that you will listen to the entire communication and you will also communicate as and when it is needed. Okay, now that you've heard both the parties, right, and you have communicated what had to be communicated to both of them, now at the back of what actually is going to happen at the backstage? How are you basically at your end going to solve this problem? Well, you have to analyze in smaller groups, right? So make small groups so that you can basically get to know the real picture, because both the parties are going to tell their version of the story, right? You need to get the real version of it out, and for that to happen, this step is going to be extremely important, and along with that it also is going to be extremely tough, because it really becomes kind of really confusing when you go deep inside the real picture, right? So here is when you will need to follow your gut instincts. You will need to decide basis your judgment. You will also need to put in a lot of your effort to probably understand both the parties to come to basically a solution, right? So now go ahead and analyze in smaller groups. Okay, now that you have both the version 1, version 2 and the real picture also in your mind, after all the investigation that you've done, what do you do in the last? Obviously, you're going to reach an agreement, because that is what the entire endeavor was, right? That is what you intended to do right from the very first step. That is why probably this entire issue was also brought to you, because you were expected to reach to an agreement. So here comes the last step. Now this step, now by the time you reach to this step, you would have a very, very clear picture in your mind. You would have kind of, seen the entire situation 360 degrees, and now you would be in that position to give the right, or to make both the parties to reach to an agreement and solve everything basically very, very efficiently and very, very in a way which is acceptable to both the parties, right? So now you would be able to reach to that peaceful agreement mode. Well, I know this is gonna be probably the biggest challenge which you would face as a leader, but you cannot escape it. It is gonna happen definitely, maybe sometime in your life as a leader. Well, I'm sure if this happens, you would be prepared for it, because this video is going to help you a lot to prepare for that. Well, I'll see you again in the next video with another important topic. Till that time, keep learning with Tutorials Point and Tutorix. Have a good day.